that we are live. Jennifer Warren, welcome to
Thank
the Powerhouse Women Show.
thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm looking forward to talking with you because you are an expert in an area that touches so many people. We hear this, and we know, one of the things that we also know is that COVID and pandemic has really put a spotlight on people's personal lives in a way that maybe they weren't before. And we didn't necessarily know a lot of the personal things going on with people, but I think because of the pandemic, we have people in the professional environment sharing a lot more about what's going on with them personally. And a big part of that is that, we there are divorces that happen. That's how things go and in life. And you are a certified divorce coach. You're an expert in this area. How did you decide to take this path in your career and get into this area of expertise? So what inspired this career path?
So, interesting question. Many years ago, I went through my own divorce, and I met a friend who was a certified divorce coach, and it was so interesting to me what she was, discussing. And so I decided to start taking some classes. And as I started to learn more about how to make the process easier and more efficient and productive for individuals, I went through the certified divorce coach program and just ran with it. I became a Supreme Court family mediator and then a marital mediator. And, even going through my own divorce, I knew there had to be a healthier way
Mhm,
of dissolving the marriage. And
mhm,
all the books that I read, they made me even more nervous. They were in
mhm,
legalese, and there were so many tentacles to the divorce process. And I knew that with the knowledge I had and the knowledge I was accruing, that I could help individuals move through the process in a more dignified and healthy manner.
mhm. Well, I think a lot of us have heard the statistic that 50% of marriages end in divorce. I want to ask you, is that actually accurate? And how has the divorce rate maybe changed even in the last, 20 years? Is that so? Are we divorcing more? Are we divorcing less? So first, is that 50% accurate? And then, what does the trend line look like over the last 20 years?
Great question. So actually, it's about 42%.
Oh, okay.
Right? So the divorce rates have decreased.
Mhm.
Now I know that they're saying during COVID, things, the rate increased a tad, although the overall rate is still lower than it had been, in a while. I will say this to you though, that here is a trend that we are seeing more and more is that less people are getting married, right? Less
Mhm.
people are actually going through the ceremony. They're more partnering up. They're living together. They're getting married later if they're getting married at all.
Mm.
Yeah.
Interesting. And what do you know, like, is there a hypothesis on why that is happening? Why are people not getting married, but they're deciding to come together and live together and have a life together?
I think that the younger generation, many of them feel that there's no need to have the legal document,
Mm.
right?
Mhm.
And, that's why also you are seeing an increased rate of signing premarital arrangements and agreements,
Mhm.
right? Because people are realizing that they can have this relationship without having this financial bond,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And so that's why we're seeing a slight, shift.
Right. Well, so we still have, though, a 42% rate of divorce, which sounds pretty high, right? That's still a high number, although it's come down, as you said, over the last 20 or so years. What do people need to know about divorce? Because, as you said, also the pandemic, and maybe this is anecdotal, but I think a lot of us saw celebrities who were together suddenly broke off their marriages. It was in the press, maybe. So that doesn't necessarily translate into statistics, but what do people need to know about divorce? And, I ultimately want to get to an understanding of how can people, based on your expertise and your experience, how can people work through it since it is something that we experience? How can we work through it more productively?
Well, that's a great question. And I will tell you that, you know, divorce happens, right? And so when it does, when it's on the table for you, you have two choices. It's called a choice point, right? You
Mm.
can be victimized by the situation, or you can decide you're going to be a creator. If it is happening, how can you make the best of what is happening?
Mhm.
And, what I want people to know is that in 2013, the American Bar Association defined divorce coaching as the fourth element of the divorce process. So who are the
Mm.
cast of characters when you're dissolving your marriage? There is usually an attorney. You have
Mhm.
some type of financial specialist. Um, then you have a therapist and also a coach. Therapy
Mhm.
is very different than coaching. Therapy is more past oriented, why you're here in this moment, and coaching is very much forward focused.
Mhm.
You are deciding to get married, or you're in the should I, shouldn't I stage. What do you want and how to bridge that gap?
Mhm.
So, what I would say to people who are in that should I, shouldn't I stage or going through the process is that knowledge is power. Too many people lawyer up very quickly
Mm.
without knowing that there are several ways that they can dissolve their marriage, right? There are alternative ways, alternative dispute resolutions that they could use to work through the end of the marriage. They can use mediation. They can do collaborative law. They can go find a traditional attorney, you know.
Mhm.
Not every divorce requires this position-based process.
Right.
It really doesn't. And so becoming aware of your choices and becoming educated on what process is gonna work best for you is not only going to help the divorce
Mhm.
process itself. If you have children, it is really going to be beneficial so that you can create the most amicable process for yourselves. Because remember, at one point, they love each other.
Yeah, right. Well, okay, I want to delve into that a little bit because I think we all have heard and know people who have gone through the process of divorcing, and it it can be, I'm sure, something that is a mutual thing. There was nobody, let's say, who was on one end of the, like, let's get divorced, and the other one was like, no, absolutely not. But those situations of course occur, but there are a lot of situations, and you can speak to this better than I can, that are not like that, where one party wronged the other party. There was something that happened that was dishonest.
Mhm.
And so that puts it into a contentious situation just to start. So
Exactly.
how, given those situations that we all know, people who have experienced, if we have not experienced them necessarily even ourselves,
Mhm.
many of us have, how do you move forward in a productive fashion in those instances, especially if you have children who you need to, you will ultimately need to co-parent with this person over time.
Mhm. Mhm. Well, the first thing is to realize that if the divorce is happening, how can you separate your emotional side to the business side of divorce?
Mhm.
I talk a lot about this in my book because those are the two essential categories, right? And so if you have a divorce coach on your side as a thinking partner, as a sounding board, you develop skills to separate the emotional side from the business side, because when you don't, that's when you make really horrible mistakes. And that's when you don't own your process. you throw in the towel, you let emotions cloud your judgment, and you can't make good decisions. So having someone who specializes in the divorce process, who can help you with all the tentacles that there are in a divorce process, particularly if it's a high net worth divorce,
Mm-hmm.
is extremely beneficial, and it really ends up saving you money. Many people think, "Oh, well, how am I gonna hire a divorce coach and have a therapist and a financial advisor and an attorney?" Well, here's the thing, each of us have our lane, right? You don't hire an attorney to go and speak about all your emotional issues, because they will listen, but they will be charging you at a much higher rate than coaches do. And that is not their area of expertise, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think that's great advice. So basically, you're saying if you are if you are in the situation, you need to be approaching it as, okay, how would I behave if this were a business dealing?
That's right.
Because that kind of removes a lot of the emotion
Mhm.
from the situation. Of course, I'm sure that is easier said than done. I want to go back for a second though and ask you, how do you have advice for people who are at this stage that you mentioned earlier of the should I, shouldn't I?
Mhm.
Let's say, you are not sure, like you're married, but you're not sure. Do you have advice for people who are in that situation and they're trying to decide what to do next?
Well, again, that goes back to knowledge is power.
Mhm.
I would start reading materials. My book, Strategies and Tips from a Divorce Coach, A Roadmap to Move Forward, is this is it. It
Mhm.
it is a very user-friendly book, and it separates the whole process into what I call 4 quadrants. There are 4 quadrants of divorce. How would you organize best for the divorce? There's a whole emotional component, financial component, and the legal component. And going back to the organizational part, if you're in the should I, shouldn't I stage, it's a great time to start understanding your finances,
Mhm.
right? To
Mhm.
really get an understanding of what does it cost every month for you to live the way you want to live. Same with, incorporating what you spend on the children, and really getting a firm understanding, because that's really, children and finances are the big two sticky issues in divorce.
Mhm.
And the more you can prepare, even if you decide to put, divorce on the bookshelf, the more you prepare, the more empowered you will feel. And
Mhm.
by the way, I don't know if your listeners know this, but in the word empower, what are the first 2 letters?
The E and the M.
Turn them around.
Ah.
Me power. And,
Mm.
happiness is an inside job,
Mhm.
and power comes from within, right?
Mhm.
And so the more information you can accrue and understand, the stronger you will be to take those brave bites forward. I never
Mhm.
say baby steps, because babies are not empowered. So the
Mhm.
words you use, you really want to help empower yourself.
Yeah. So you mentioned the book, which the strategies and tips from a divorce coach. In the book, though, you have a whole section of the book, a big part of the book,
Mhm.
where it's more broadly speaking to self-help beyond just, whether you're in a divorce situation. It's the self-help idea and how to deal with uncertainty.
Mhm.
And I really want to spend a little bit of time talking about this because one of the things that we do is we do a lot of research and asking women what's going on with them, how are they feeling, what's on their minds. And since the pandemic started, the number one emotion that we were hearing from women, and literally out of all the emotions that we listed, the number one for a long time was uncertainty.
Mhm.
That the number one emotion. And this is something that makes people feel very destabilized, right? Uncertainty, you don't feel like you're on solid ground. Your
Mhm.
book does have a lot of focus on how to deal with uncertainty. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. It's very interesting. We tend to lead our lives, with not a lot of self reflection.
Mm,
And if we were to stop and think about it, uncertainty exists every second of every day. Nothing is really certain. My father used to say the only two things that are certain are death and taxes. Okay. And so, this whole idea that we have control is a setup.
hmm
So,
hmm
what is really important is that we understand that uncertainty exists, and how can we move forward with that. So one of the things I talk about in my book is this framework that I've developed called the lean framework. And what the lean stands for is L is let it be. So often you'll hear people and they'll say, just let it go. Let it go that your husband had an affair. Let it go that, he was investing in something, or let it go that she, was drinking too much, whatever it is. It's a setup to say, let it go, because it happened. Anything
hmm
that happens is marks you, right?
hmm
It has an impact. Letting it be, understanding that, yes, whatever situation happened, and how can I move forward? How can I take those micro steps forward? Okay? The E is empower. How can you empower yourself? How can what are some of the things that will give you strength? And to really take the time to sit and think about them. And I always say to my clients, make a list, because there's a saying, if you think it, you write it, and then say it, it becomes more potent and powerful for you.
Mm. I
Okay?
love that.
Yes.
Think
Think,
it, write
write,
it,
say it.
and say.
And it doesn't have to be something that you do, you create the list in one sitting, right? It's not about all or nothing thinking. It's about thinking in the gray zone. So you can continue to add to this list. It can be an organic list.
hmm
Okay. Then the A is acceptance. Okay. Many people have a hard time with this because they believe that acceptance means approval, and it
hmm
doesn't. It
hmm
doesn't mean that you approve of bad behavior or you approve of negligence, or it just means that you are accepting what is,
Yeah.
and then going back to, are you going to be victimized by it, or are you going to be a creator?
Yeah.
And everyone can be a creator. And then the last one is N, which is nourish. How do you nourish yourself physically, emotionally, and spiritually?
Yeah.
And it's really, most people, they say, are sleepwalking through life.
Mm,
So I'm always curious, if I encourage my clients to stack a habit to something they already do, to welcome in how self-care.
mm,
So, like when you're brushing your teeth in the morning, that's a habit. People don't realize it. Stack a mantra, or stack something that you're determined to do that day
mm,
while you're brushing your teeth. That
mm,
helps to nourish your soul. And
mm,
particularly if you have children, I really want you to try this activity. That create a mantra, or an intention that really is going to lift you up during the day.
mm. That is such great advice, and I have to tell you, there are a couple things I want to delve into a little bit deeper, but
Okay.
I want to touch on what you just said about the habit,
Mm,
because uh, I have been thinking a lot lately, and I've been reading this book called Atomic Habits, and how do you build habits? How do you, and that it's very easy to start building bad habits, but building good habits take time. But if you do a small thing each day, a small
mhm,
change each day, it
mhm,
actually adds and adds and adds. And I love this idea of taking a habit that you already have
mhm.
and adding a layer onto it, that mantra, that's something that you can just put into an existing habit that's a positive habit.
Yes.
Because I think the positivity begets positivity.
Mhm.
right? It's that's just
100%.
all part of that process. And so while you're already doing a good habit, brushing your teeth, it's a good
Mhm.
habit.
Yes, it is. Can't say my 16-year-old always does that, but
But that if you can layer onto it, that
Mhm.
mantra that you talked about,
Yeah.
that is and then it just becomes another good habit you've layered on to another to a habit that you already have that's a good one. I
Yes, and
love that.
it's actually called habit stacking. It's not, a framework that I've developed, but, you can read a lot about habit stacking, and I will tell you something else that's been very powerful in my practice. When you're brushing your teeth at night, there is something called the GLAD technique,
Mm,
and this is amazing. It really helps, with positivity. One thing you're grateful for, one thing you learned that day,
mm,
one thing you can acknowledge about yourself, and one thing you're determined to accomplish the next day. And it doesn't have to be monumental things. And we all learn something. We all can acknowledge something. We all can set an intention for the next day, right? And here's the thing. And if you think about it, I think you probably will agree with me. We seldom take the time to acknowledge our accomplishments.
mm.
Doesn't have again, it doesn't have to be this monumental thing. It could be that, you set the intention in the morning to take 3 deep breaths, and you did. So you
Mhm.
followed through with a promise to yourself. And that is something very empowering.
Mm. I love that. I love that. And actually, the next question I was going to ask you, which I think I suspect is related to GLAD that you just said this acronym. And I love acronyms. I
Me
love
too.
that
Me
they are
too.
and I love them because they're memorable, right? So everyone can say, "All right, GLAD, what is that?" That's grateful, learned, acknowledgement, and determined, right? So you can start to remember those things. You mentioned earlier self-reflection. And
Mm,
this is a topic that we hear from a lot of women, like self-reflecting, self-awareness. We recognize that it's important, but we struggle with it. So do
mhm,
you have any tips for women who are looking to build their self-awareness,
mhm.
their that reflection so that they can really not just, as you said, sleepwalk through life?
That's right. Right. Well, I will say that, habit stacking has been very beneficial for me and for my clients. And if you start small, you take those micro steps, it really it starts to fill your cup. And when you start to feel better, you do better.
Mm,
And so, what I want to say to people is, I know mindfulness and meditation, they're big buzzwords right now. And I think what makes people a little apprehensive is they feel, oh, I have to meditate for 20 minutes or I have to do this for an extended period of time. No, if you do the GLAD principle, the GLAD technique, and it takes literally 1 minute, you are being mindful,
mhm,
you are
mhm,
meditating,
mhm,
right? You're being
mhm,
very much in the present. What happens is that most of us either are forecasting our future or rehashing our past.
mm,
What I'm asking of your listeners is even to set the intention with a mantra or an intention in the morning and using this GLAD principle in the evening when you're brushing your teeth, you're creating space for yourself.
mhm,
Create
mhm.
space for yourself. It's fueling your soul.
Yeah,
And the better you feel, the more you're likely to do it.
yeah. I love that. I mean, that is so insightful too, because the and you mentioned before the think it, write it, say it.
Mm,
I think if you combine GLAD
mhm,
even with write it down. I mean, I think for some people that just that action of, okay, I've thought about it. Now I'm going to write it down. Or as you're thinking about it, write it down. It
mhm.
really makes it so much, as you said, it becomes more potent, right? It really it makes it real if
That's right.
you spend the time to do that.
Mhm.
I love that. I love that of that advice, and I think it's relevant so broadly. I mean, beyond whether you're somebody, I mean, a lot of these tips and your advice and insights are relevant for anyone, regardless of what you're going through in your life.
That's right.
Um, all right, my last question for you, Jennifer.
Okay.
What do you wish you could tell the young Jennifer that was just starting out?
So I think about this question often.
Mm.
And my answer to that is listen to your inner whispers
Mm,
because
mm,
they will guide you. They are
mm,
your heart star, your inner GPS. And I think that if we're true to ourselves in reflection, when we didn't listen to our inner whispers, our path was not the one we might have taken.
mm, mhm,
And I very much believe in standing in your truth. And I too have been the victim of not listening to my inner whispers. And so
mhm.
I set the intention of when I do feel or hear something within my soul to really take the time to think about it because it has merit.
Yeah. Well, I think it goes back to what you were saying before about the value of acknowledging, right?
Mhm.
We talked about the A, right? Glad, the A is the acknowledgement. Just
Mhm.
the idea of of saying that this is something that I want to delve into, you
Mhm.
might decide, okay, I've thought about it and it's a whisper, but it's not something, it's coming from fear, it's coming from something else that is
Mhm.
not that important, but then you can move forward. You
Mhm.
can move forward from that and not have it keep gnawing at you
Right.
because you haven't taken the time to look at it, to
That's right.
acknowledge it and to look at it.
And that's really important. I will leave you with this. There's something called the 3 A's framework, right? And it's the 3 A's framework for change, and it's in my book. And basically, what it says is that, first you have to be aware of whatever the situation is. Awareness is the most important. Once you
Mhm.
become aware, you can work on the acceptance.
Mm,
And then that's where you can have action, which
mm,
is you can shift gears, the
mm.
3 A's framework. And so I always say to people, if they have this awareness, I say, that's great. You're one third of the way there.
Yeah.
You're in it. You're moving. Keep on moving because you're not growing in your comfort zone. Growth happens outside of the comfort zone. Keep going. You can do it.
Mm.
So,
This, I mean, I can't, I've taken a ton of notes.
okay.
I am, I am certain that whoever gets a chance to watch this is going to get so much insight, whether they are somebody who has gone through a divorce, contemplating divorce, like it's so much broader than that. I think the advice that you're sharing and the framework for how to think and build self-awareness, I am so appreciative for the time you spent with us today, Jennifer. Thank you.
And thank you for all the work you're doing, especially, for the women because women were really, the victims of COVID. And
Mhm.
now we are all working towards being creators. And there's a lot of messages that can come out of that mess. And it's about being positive and moving forward.
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much for spending your time with us today. I
Thank
really
you.
appreciate it.
Thank you.